In the upcoming Johns Creek election, there's a stark difference on business taxes. Hi, my name is EJ Musa, and I just want to talk to you a little bit about the two candidates that we have running for Johns Creek City Council in the special election on April 18th. And I would like to suggest that you watch a little bit of these presentations that follow, because both candidates have stark differences on taxing residents and businesses of Johns Creek and what the process is for determining whether or not taxes are too high, if they're too high at all. So stay tuned and watch a little bit of this with me. Let's listen to Chris Coughlin and what he says on business taxes for Johns Creek.
Chris, what specific business tax structure do you propose that will allow small business growth and make Johns Creek a more conducive environment to attract larger businesses? And how do you think that this would impact revenue?
So I've been pretty straightforward on this, that during my term I tried to have us review our occupational taxes. You got to remember that we're some of the highest in the North Fulton, West Gwinnett, South Forsyth area.
So I think that bears a pause here and a comment. We have some of the highest taxes in the Forsyth, Gwinnett, North Fulton County area. That means it's harder for Johns Creek businesses to compete against their neighboring businesses in other cities. It also means that businesses do have to make a choice where they locate. It could be one of the reasons we have so many empty storefronts. Mr. Coughlin understands that, and that's why he's trying to address the occupational business taxes. And while this is not the only tax he plans to target, it is a great starting point for the residents of Johns Creek to understand how taxes work and how they may negatively impact businesses.
And I was actually talking with the Chamber today, the Chamber of Commerce, of how we can actually bring businesses in through occupational tax reform. And it kind of actually segued into something that can be coupled with traffic. So something I've been very adamant about is that if we're going to truly be the exception, as our motto is, we need to have the best structure of occupational taxes for businesses. It's a very minute amount of the budget. We could essentially cut occupational taxes altogether and still have a balanced budget, still probably run a surplus. That's how much more tax revenue we get in than expenditures. So we were talking about it, and we were discussing potentially working with businesses and offering occupational tax reductions if they would alter some of their employees' driving behavior. So remember, I always argue that it's not a capacity problem, it's a timing problem with our traffic. So if we could essentially allow some of these big businesses in occupational tax relief, if they would move some of their employees to come in later, or if they can implement more work from home programs. But as it is right now, to make us the most competitive city in the North Fulton area, we would have to reduce occupational taxes by 40%. But we still have a surplus, so it wouldn't impact the budget.
John, do you believe that the city can cut expenditures without sacrificing services? And how would you recommend accomplishing this?
I mean, first of all, I think you need to look at the budget from a more micro perspective to do that. I haven't had the opportunity to look at every single line item in the city budget. What I would say is I have a background when I worked for the small service-based company that I was talking about earlier. Top line revenue was great. The back door was just as wide open. We had a 33% customer attrition rate every year. So you had to go create 33% of new business every year. Truth be told, the CEO was one of the big line items that was kind of crippling the company. And so for a year, I worked every single day with the CFO to try to identify $40,000 a month in expenses to cut. And when we walked into his office, he started crying. And I said, look, I understand that's a stressful situation. We don't necessarily want your lifestyle to change. However, we created a list of 127 items for him and totaled it up for the monthly total of expenses. And we said, you get to 40, and that's all that matters. And so what I would say is, if I'm elected to city council, I will take a very comprehensive look at the city budget, line item by line item, with asking questions. That's the thing that's important is, you can't just say, give me a red pen and we'll strike it out. because that's a short-term fix and you don't know what the long-term implications of that are. You don't know who it affects, how it affects them, and the other results that come out of that decision. So what I would say is before we start making some broad comment about cutting taxes, cutting revenue, cutting expenses, there needs to be proper due diligence. As a business owner, you don't just say we're going to cut expenses by 30%. You have a much more deep conversation about what are the long-term implications of doing so. So to circle back, what I would say is it needs to be looked at comprehensively with a proper level of due diligence. Look at your contracts, bid them out if you need to in a different way. Competition drives prices down. There's so long economic answer to this question, but it's got to have a comprehensive look at it to see what the downrange implications of specific cuts would be. But short answer, yes, I'll look at the budget, line item by line item, and you know that there's inefficiencies. There's inefficiency in every organization. But you have to understand if you cut that, what's it going to mean down the road, down the line, and how does that affect citizens and the city itself?
Chris, what is the one thing you most want to see in Johns Creek that does not exist, and why?
I think we're on our path to a city center, so that's what we purchased City Hall. Now we're building out the parks and potentially an amphitheater and pavilion. So we're going to have a space that Johns Creek residents can call home for events.
Okay. John, what specific business tax structure do you propose that will allow small business growth and make Johns Creek a more conducive environment to attract larger businesses? How do you think this would impact revenue?
I think before you move into the micro level of that question, you have to look at the macro level. The fact that S&P and Moody's gave us a AAA credit rating, one of less than 200 cities that have a AAA credit rating, and one of the only cities that's ever received a AAA credit rating out of the gate, tells me that something is happening that's working and creating a pro-business environment. Now that said,
I'm sorry, but I have to interrupt right there because the AAA credit rating in Johns Creek is not a result of businesses within Johns Creek, but it's a result of the residents of Johns Creek and their ability to pay the tax load that the city has placed on them.
when you look at the Johns Creek Chamber and the Johns Creek Advantage, they also confirm that there are no indicators that there is a negative view on businesses that are currently in Johns Creek or potential businesses coming into Johns Creek. Now, I think that you can look at the occupational tax rate and see if there's a reduction that can be made. However, I want to know there's a problem before you start going and throwing solutions at it. Again, this is the due diligence process that needs to take place. Go ask the businesses, are you being taxed too much? Are you thinking about moving your company? Go talk to the potential businesses that are thinking about moving into Johns Creek. Is the tax rate too high? And again, go to the business owners themselves and have those conversations and do your due diligence. Also, you have to understand, if you lower the occupational tax rate, again, it may be quote-unquote a nominal dollar amount, but those are real dollars. And in politics, sometimes you hear nominal dollar amount. $300,000-$400,000, I'm sorry, it's $300,000 or $400,000. So something's getting cut.
So it's at this point I have to ask if Mr. Flores understands what a budget surplus is, because when Mr. Coughlin talks about cutting the occupational taxes and Mr. Flores says that's $300,000 that we will not be collecting, and what services are we going to be cutting, it makes me realize that he doesn't understand that that $300,000 is not coming out of services we provide to the public, but it's coming from the budget surplus. There are no cuts that are required if you have a budget surplus and you reduce taxes.
And so again, before we start broad brushing strokes saying we need to cut the occupational tax rate, let's look at what's the business community saying. Do we need to cut the occupational tax rate? Are they burdened by it? Is a majority of them burdened by it? Are we keeping them from adding value in the marketplace? And if we are, take a hard look at it. If we're not, leave it as it is. But if you do cut it, what are the downrange implications of making those cuts? What's getting cut from the services and the value that we enjoy as citizens of Johns Creek? Because something is going to go away. Somebody's not going to get paid.
So if I understand Mr. Flores correctly here, unless the businesses can show there's a burden on their profitability by these business taxes the city of Johns Creek has levied, there really is not a problem. And Mr. Flores does not want to work on reducing those taxes unless we can actually prove there's a problem that is impacting the businesses by the high level of taxation. I'm sorry, I have to disagree with that completely. The city needs to be the one to prove they need the tax dollars if they're going to take them, not just take them from the businesses because they can. And while both of these candidates did not answer questions on the millage rate during the JCCA forum, they did answer those questions at the Medlock Bridge forum held prior to this one meeting here. And both candidates had similar answers. Mr. Flores doesn't see a need to reduce the millage rate unless the citizens can show there's a burden on paying those taxes, while Chris Coughlin, understanding there's been a budget surplus year in and year out, would like to lower the millage rate and leave that money in the hands of the citizens. So we have basically two different philosophies. Mr. Flores does not feel that as long as the residents can afford to pay the burden, that the taxes should be lowered. Mr. Coughlin, who believes that the millage rate should be lowered, believes that budget surpluses more or less belong in the hands of the residents. So there is a stark difference going forward. It's two different views on money and where it belongs, and you have to ask yourself which candidate is more conservative when it comes to fiscal matters. This is EJ Musa with The Naked Truth, and I thank you for watching.